The field of UX writing, sometimes called content design or product content strategy, has emerged over the past decade or so. As often happens with a new discipline, folks getting into the field can feel a bit lost as they look for resources and expertise. Yuval Keshtcher is building a community to help folks navigate this new profession. He runs discussion forums, offers online courses, hosts a UX writing podcast, and is organizing a new conference. If you want to understand this new field, Yuval can help.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. We talk with professionals who work across the span of content strategy, from small businesses to big enterprises, from content design to content marketing, from solo consultancies to huge agencies. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 62 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I'm really happy today to have with us Yuval, and I'm going to let Yuval pronounce his last name because I'm not a native Hebrew speaker. So, Yuval, welcome to the show. Tell the folks how to pronounce your last name and what you're up to.
So the name is Yuval Keshtcher, and thank you for having me. And I must say that I'm a big fan, and I'm really excited to be here right now.
Well, I'm super excited. It's very mutual because I think you're in the most exciting part of this field right now. My podcast course is about content strategy in general, but I think the hottest, most interesting part of that field is this whole field of UX writing. So the first thing I always like to ask people is how did you end up here? Because we all have different pathways into this field. How did you come to be interested in UX writing?
Okay, so I started as a graphic designer. I was playing around with Photoshop when I was a teenager. Went to the army when I was 18 because in Israel it's mandatory to go to the army. Finished with that after 3 years and found myself doing different kinds of gigs. But after literally doing rounds around the world and looking for what should I do with my life, I figured out that I will just keep doing graphic design because that's what brings joy to my life. And from graphic design, I did a transition to product design, UX design, web design. That's how we used to call it. Just because I was tired to do freelance gig for restaurants and stuff like that. Print stuff, and I was looking for the next challenge. I was tired of running after clients. In Israel, it's very common to chase your clients, so they would pay you eventually. And I figured out that I would look for something a bit more, a bit more serious, a bit more stable. But I must say that during the whole journey, entrepreneurship was also something that I was always trying to do. I was always trying to build something new from scratch, and I was always looking for some kind of a niche. And I must say that I failed multiple times creating stuff to create stuff. And I must say that after understanding what I love to do and what I need to do, I also found a way to create something new in that field.
Great. And I want to fast forward a little bit because I think you now identify as a product designer and a very UX focused product designer. And the product you're doing is this UX. One of the things you do is your UX writing course. And I think, actually, let me back up from that a little bit because the need for that course is really interesting to me. The fact that we're in this time period where UX writing, and I think there's also other names it goes by product content or content design or content developer. I've heard there's a bunch of different names for it. How did that come to your attention, and how did you decide to focus on that?
All right. So in my agenda, I try to say that I don't care at all about titles. There is a very big need right now in the market for writers in tech. I used to work as a product designer for different companies, different startup companies in Israel, and there wasn't any writer in the team. No one that will create the copy of the digital interface that we create. So that was my responsibility. Like my product manager was like, hey, I need a little bit more context over here, and I need a little bit more context over there. And it was in English. I'm not a native writer, so I was looking for many resources for product writing, basically. And I just couldn't find. It was maybe 2016, so I couldn't find many resources. So I started a Facebook group. The name of the Facebook group is Microcopy and UX Writing. And I was just start to curate every piece of content that I could possibly could and share it with the Facebook group. At first, there wasn't anyone in the Facebook group. It was me and a bunch of friends that I invited. But at some point, I noticed that there are a little bit more people that publishing content about the idea of microcopy and the idea of writing interface for products, and that there are starting to be different kinds of methodologies and best practices that people are sharing. So every day I was just publishing in the Facebook groups, microcopy examples, articles, and I also invited all of the authors of these articles to join the discussion. So I think that was a smart move, because then the discussion became, just from Yuval and a bunch of friends, like a professional discussion. And at some point, it just started to explode organically. And many people just came to the discussion from different companies, share different ideas, share different, best practices. And at some point, I decided that I want to create content for the community that I created. So I started to interview people from the industry and share it with the community, like share their best practices. And that's what I did for a while. And I, interviewed people from PayPal and Wix and Fiverr and like many big companies that hired writers to do the product writing. Share it with the community. The responses were pretty great. Many people were like asking me for actual course, for actual education. And at first I didn't know what to do with it. I thought that there are probably other people that should do it, and I will just keep like managing the community. And at some point that I just figure out that the amount of research that I did on that topic and the amount of ideas and best practices and methodologies that I've learned, and along with also collaborating with more writers to help me. Of course, I'm not alone with the team of the UX Learning Hub, but at some point we understood that we could build some kind of course that will define how UX writers should work today in the industry. And today we work with, we help our students to work in the biggest companies, in banks, and we're doing this end-to-end process of, I don't like to say zero to hero, but like we're really trying to help them to find a job as UX writers. So the community, Facebook group at first, but now a big community of people that are in our newsletter and listen to our podcast, and it's almost 60,000 people right now.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And I was about to say that we're creating a lot of massive amount of content for the community. And also we have the best practices to kind of educate about this exciting new field of UX writing. And also I must say that there is a lot more to learn. So we're always improving our product. We're always improving our content. I always keep up with the research and the best practices and the best tools. And that's also the reason I'm doing Writers in Tech podcast, because I want to interview people and ask them about their processes and understand more best practices. And today, we're even like helping companies to hire UX writers. So companies approach us, they ask us how they should hire, how should they approach this process. And Yeah, and we give them all of the advice that we can possibly can.
Well, I got to say, I love that story because this you had this one very specific part of your job, like, oh, I need copy in this product interface that I'm working on, and all of a sudden, this 60,000 person community and multiple products and a podcast and everything else has emerged from this like little nugget of curiosity back there. That's really impressive. Hey, I
Thank
want to
you.
tell. So you've obviously learned a lot along the way in this.
Hmm.
One of the things, and you just alluded to this, like that companies are coming to you to help with recruiting. I think the other side of that equation, I know, I don't know, half my friends in Seattle right now are looking to get into UX writing or are in UX writing. And
Hmm.
is there a common, I guess, is there a common pathway? Are there certain careers that are best suited to UX writing? And then regardless of that, kind of what are the skills you need? What are the things that employers are looking for?
That's a very good question. I guess that I was on record saying it many times, but I always say that if you put 10 UX writers in a row, all of them would probably have different backgrounds. So it's not necessarily like that. So a lot of people are coming from journalism, a lot of people are coming from marketing, and there are UX designers that are doing the transition to UX writing. Um, Content writers, yeah, and that would probably the background of people. But I must say the background can be also psychology and many different unique paths to this role. And the second question that you asked was, which kind of skills do you need to have in order to do that? So um, I just had a conversation about it today, but I would say that curiosity. You need to understand how to do research, because I believe that one of the most important things before designing an interface or writing an interface or creating any kind of experience is to empathize with your users, understand who are your users, who are your listeners. For the podcast, like we had a discussion, like we can have a discussion about who are the listeners for a podcast, so we need to have a discussion about who are the people that are going to use our platform, what is their pain points, what is their goals. And if we're talking about UX writing, so we also need to ask ourselves, how do they talk, which kind of language do they use, how can we create conversations with them, and what will be negative approach, what will be positive approach, which kind of voice and tone we should use, and how can we create an alignment between all of our products so the messaging will be consistent to these kind of users. Um, yeah, and that's the kind of
Yeah.
skills that you need to have.
Right. And you're just reminding, as you said that, you're reminding me of like there's, I love this quote. I use it all the time now, that William Gibson, the science fiction author, said, "The
Mhm.
future is here. It's just unevenly distributed." And there's been like all that language you just used about, that it's the common language of any content strategist, whether you're doing content marketing or website stuff
Mhm.
or a SaaS product or a mobile app or whatever it is you're working on. There's all those things about voice and tone and alignment with what else is going on, and tying all those things together. And when I say the future is here, but it's just unevenly distributed, like I was just thinking last night about a friend of mine who worked for in 1996, I think, like 24 years ago, a guy named Clement Mock had left Apple and started this design firm in San Francisco called Studio Archetype. And I had a friend, I didn't even, she and I had worked together a couple years before that. I had her on the show a while back, and she was talking about like the teams that they had there. It sounded like all the stuff you just said they were doing 24 years ago, but nobody else, it didn't catch on. It didn't really take off. So what do you think is different now? And like when you
Mhm.
think about like the work that Karen McGrain did at Razorfish, 20 years ago, or
Mhm.
folks like that, a lot of these practices have been around. What do you think is going on that has made it finally, kind of explode and erupt like it has?
Okay, so I think that we had some kind of a digital revolution in the past few years. Okay,
Hmm.
digitize of services. All of the services were digitized the way that we're using banking services, the way that we communicate with each other, everything just changed completely. It's really difficult to put your finger on what part of history it happened. I would say that it probably happened when the first iPhone was launched, probably. And that's where UX was starting to evolve. So that's not exactly where UX started to evolve. So we had Don Norman that was talking about UX back in the 90s because he was a user experience architect in Apple. And he was talking more about like packaging and, you know, the feeling that you have when you smell a new Apple product and like how it looks like and how it feels. Mm-hmm. So he was talking about experience back then. Don Norman is an author of also a very famous design book. Design of everyday
the design things. Of everyday things. Yeah, I've got a copy. Yeah. I'm looking around.
Yeah,
anyhow,
it's a good one.
I'll link to it in the show notes.
Exactly. You can also look for his TED Talks. He's a very fascinating guy. Mm-hmm. And Apple was the first to talk about user experience, and they were the first to create the iPhone and the mobile apps that basically change everything. Because if you will see like the first announcement of the iPhone, the vision, and I recommend to add it to the show notes too, the vision of Steve Jobs was like, okay, no more buttons. Like, it's all about software right now, and everything, like, we could do a lot of crazy things using that software. And mm-hmm. when we start to build these kind of softwares, so you had a lot of, I would say, inequivalence between different apps. Few were a little bit more intuitive than others. In others, there were an amazing technology, but a lot of user frustrations at the same time. And then people just realized and understood that digital products that have better user experience, that create less frustration for the users, will just bring more, eventually, more customers to the business. Mm-hmm. Okay. Better UX and better design equal more money to your business, to your company. It's not only about the technology like it used to be before the digital revolution. Okay.
Right.
Today I can create and design fantastic systems without developing any technology, but only use logic and common sense and design. That's what we did when we built the student progress tracker for the UX Writing Hub. We didn't need developers to create any new technology. We used existing tools, but we designed it in a way that it will actually work. Mm-hmm. That it will be useful and it will work. So that's what UX is all about. So now that we have UX and there was a big rise in the idea of UX design, there was a big misconception. Because many people thought that UX design means that it needs to look pretty, okay? Also, when you say design in Hebrew, people say, okay, you're doing the design, make it pretty. And also in English, people might think that if someone is talking about the design, he's talking about the fact that it's pretty, but that's not the case. Design is how it works and how it feels and how it's used, basically, okay? It can be aesthetic and beautiful, but at the end of the day, it doesn't work, so the design is bad and broken. So we had a rise in UX design, and we had a lot of misconceptions, and we had to sell UX as a thing for different organizations because stakeholders and company owners didn't quite understood what UX is all about. And then after people just realized that products that have better user experience have more clients and have more, like, less churn, more retention, more conversions. So people are coming back to companies that have products with great design. Mm-hmm. And that's about design. And I think what I feel like is that UX writers are product designers. They are designers. They design experiences using better communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, when you think of, as you were talking there, I was reminded of some of the, because there's sort of like, I think part of the way that develops is that people who do master it and do well, people pay mm-hmm. attention to them and go, wow, why is Apple doing so well? And I think specifically when you think of UX writing and product content, like there's so many companies that, while it might not be their core competency, it's an important competency at places like MailChimp and Shopify and Intercom, that they are really mastering. They have really well developed internal content practices on their product teams. So I think that's sort of, but I feel like that might have lagged a little bit behind all the stuff you were just talking about, because a lot of that, like it was that's 13 years ago now that the iPhone came out. And that sort of like pushed that. And then but it's only been like, I think maybe 5 years in over the time span where people are really recognizing like, oh, wow, if you have embedded content people on your product team, you end up with a way better user experience. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. So people were all about, okay, we need better UX design. We need better UX design. So they started hiring people from art graduates that not necessarily understand human psychology, but more about visuals. And that misconception just create a complete, cluster. And then I think that somehow the writers were left out, and I think that now more people understand that like they shouldn't be left out at any point. They should be there from the first days of UX.
Yeah. Hey, and this is reminding me of, I think of another, we kind of, I don't know if we've completed the list of skills, but I think one of the skills that's the top of any person on any UX team is collaboration. And it just occurs to me as you're talking that, a lot of like traditional writing practice has been solitary, that the people who come out of journalism and other, copywriting and other writing professions, I know I've struggled with it at times, but is that but I'm older too. I wonder if younger people are just more naturally able to just take their writing practice into a UX context where it's a lot about collaboration. Now, so two things there. One, is it safe to assume that collaboration is one of those top skills for a UX practitioner? And are there unique challenges to like writers or other professions in terms of like being good at collaboration?
So I would say that the most important skill for a UX writer is to be a great collaborator, because first of all, the ratio between designers and writers is it can be very high. What I'm trying to say is that you probably have in most product teams today much more designers than writers. So you would see probably one writer work on 3 products or 3 projects at the same time. And while doing that, they have to collaborate with that designer in that project and with that designer in that project. And then they find themselves in a position, like many writers these days told me, that they find some kind of a solution with one designer, but then they suggest that solution with a designer from complete different project, complete different team. And that's how they became some kind of a bridge. They kind of bridging between different product teams in their organization. They are a bridge between the business needs and the user needs. They're kind of working as a pretty awesome communicators for a product, for a company.
That's great. I love that perspective, because it kind of runs counter to, Jonathan Coleman at Intercom. Jonathan's he's a friend of mine, and we were just talking.
Amazing. I flew to his workshop in Ireland once.
Oh, did you? Yeah, totally worth flying around the world to see that guy. But one of the things he talks about is the importance, and similarly, I don't know. I had Kylie Hansen on the show a few episodes ago. She leads a design team, a content design team at Microsoft. And both of them would argue that some of the best, the biggest benefits come when you embed a single content designer on a product team. Now, these are bigger products, but what you just said about this being a connector across products, that there's probably a benefit, like for all of the trouble or the challenges of working on multiple products at one time. It seems like there could be a potentially huge benefit there of just bringing practice ideas and kind of cross-pollination. Is that something you're seeing in the field?
Yeah, exactly. It's like you can definitely see how the fact that there is a writer on the team. So as I said before, it's really create better communication that eventually create an alignment of the messaging for the users, which is fantastic. So we don't have like you can just see the differences really well between companies that practice it and have UX writers on board, and companies that just failed to onboard UX writers, or they don't have enough UX writers, so they suffer from it a little bit more. You can see that in these companies you have like long forms, very like tedious kind of tasks that users needs to do. And when you compare it to the companies that do have UX writers on their team, so you can like immediately see, you mentioned a few of these companies, and you can like see intuitive user experience, fun, and it's even really good for marketing at the end of the day, because you can see like people enjoying microcopy, just take a screenshot, post it on social media, or even better, like it can be product announcement that like writers communicate how you should use the product in a better way, or different suggestions. There are many ways to create content that it can also kind of a little bit overlap on the marketing side of things, but not in a nasty way, like in a really nice way.
Oh no, I totally hear you. In fact, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I've articulated in my mind what I think of as the three flavors of content strategy: kind of the marketing and business stuff, then the product stuff, and then the technical stuff. As soon as I compartmentalize them, I think, no, there's a lot of connections between them. I think the product people can learn from the marketing people, the technical people can share. Anyhow, there should be a lot of overlap there. But hey, I noticed, this always goes so fast. I notice we're already coming up close to the end of the time. I like to keep these under a half hour. But Yuval, before we wrap up, I want to make sure I give you two things. One, you do a lot of stuff. Like you mentioned your podcast, you mentioned the UX Writing Hub, you mentioned, anyhow, I can't keep up with all the stuff you do. So if you could give us I want you to give us a rundown of all the stuff that you're up to. But also, if there's anything that hasn't come up in this conversation that you want to make sure you share with my folks, I want to make sure you get that in as well.
All right. So we and my team and I are working on a UX Writing conference in Tel Aviv. It's going to be in November, and the dates are the 3rd and the 4th to November. There's going to be one day of speakers, one day of workshops. The name of the conference is UX Salon Words. The name is Words. I love that name. And that's about it. Feel free to follow the UX Writing Hub weekly newsletter for more updates, and the podcast Writers in Tech. And if you feel like you want to step into the UX writing field, so I recommend to take our free course. You can just go to our website. There is a free course just to see like what it's all about, but in a very small and concise bite. So you can check it out as well. What else? Yeah, listen to Writers in Tech podcast. It's a podcast where I interview industry leaders, and I learn a lot from it. And I'm sure that if you will listen to it too, you will learn as well.
I'll say that I do listen to that podcast, and it's great. I enjoy it. It's I kind of take the more general content strategy approach in this one, and you're just totally focused on UX writing and product content. So I love that. I also got to say I love that I hear just pretty much every day on Twitter or Facebook people complain about the lack of conferences in Europe and the Middle East. Seems like all the confab and everything happens over here in the US. So that's great. I think you'll probably get a lot of interest having a conference that doesn't require a transatlantic flight. So
I'm so stressed. Like I never organized a conference in my life, and I promised to the podcast episode back in 2019 that in 2020 I will organize a UX writing conference, and I flew to Europe to understand where I could possibly do it. I thought it would be in Berlin or maybe in Krakow, but at the end of the day, I'm from Tel Aviv. Everything logistic-wise was so much more easy to organize over there. So my idea is to do the event in Tel Aviv, but at some point we might do also a few more in Europe, and we might come to the States also if we will see that there is going to be more demand for it.
That's great. Well, good luck with that. I've done a lot of event organizing myself, and it's if you ever want to talk about that offline, just give me a shout. It's crazy making, but it's totally worth it. It's the best thing ever. So
when I meet with everyone in person.
Exactly. Yeah. In real life, that's my favorite experience. Well, thanks so much, Yuval. This has been a great conversation, and I look forward to keeping it going over the years.
Thank you so much for having me. It was amazing.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.